Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Nutrition in the News. Alternate weeks now, I'm going to be bringing you information that I'm picking up in the news or from studies that I've read about to give you some straightforward information that will help you lead healthier, happier, more active lives in many, many ways. And then on my alternate weeks, I will continue to do my more in-depth particular topics, giving you lots of information about specific topics. Sometimes you've asked me for these and these, or I've just found information I think will be of relevance to you. So coming back to tonight's theme, I put a little post out a short while ago to say I was going to focus tonight's talk around metabolic health, linked to a couple of studies that I found, and I wondered whether you were aware of exactly what we mean by metabolic health. I think there's still far too much focus around people looking at their diets from a calorie point of view, from a weight point of view, yet we overlook some really important factors around metabolic health. So exactly what are we referring to here? Well, what we're beginning to learn about through the way in which people are eating and the types of food that people are eating is we know there is this growing obesity epidemic. There's a growing increase, massive increase in type 2 diabetes. But not just sort of going beyond that, we know about cardiovascular disease, heart disease, the risk of strokes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease might be something you've heard about. Now, a lot of these factors can all come back to the same sort of things to do with what we're eating. And we can start to measure certain aspects, and these are certainly things that could be measured in a clinical health setting that can really show up, that can be contributing factors to all these things. And there were a couple of studies. One of them, the first one, was looking at intermittent fasting, and did it really matter at the time of day that you did your time, like intermittent fasting, that time restricted eating? Did it matter when you ate or not ate? And as I said, this is going beyond just looking at the weight point of view. So just thinking about these health factors, what are we looking at when we think about metabolic health markers? And you will be familiar with a lot of these. So we're thinking about our fasting blood glucose, because we know that's a big risk factor for diabetes. We're looking at our overall insulin levels. HbA1c, that's a sort of marker that's often used when you go for a blood test that's going to look at your typical glucose levels in the bloodstream that's really measured over the sort of previous 3-month average. Your total cholesterol, that's a big one that the NHS likes to pick up on, total cholesterol. But really, what is your HDL cholesterol level? That's the one that actually takes cholesterol away from the bloodstream. What is your low density lipoprotein cholesterol, your LDL? That's the one that tends to bring cholesterol into the arteries and potentially deposit it there. Your triglyceride, that's really not a healthy lipid marker. When we think about cholesterol, we want to look at triglyceride levels. What about your blood pressure? What about your uric acid levels? These are all very important factors. And another one that's very, very important when we start to look at our overall metabolic health markers is, what is your waist measurement? Now, this first study was conducted in Malaysia over 6 months. These aren't big studies, and I'm not going to say these are really set in stone. These aren't your sort of double-blind, randomized control studies that are sort of the gold standard when we do studies. They looked at 300 individuals in Malaysia over a 6-month period, and they were all obese. That was the starting point. And they looked at the time of eating for those that were doing intermittent fasting. What we mean by that, I use the word time restricted eating. When we tend to eat in an 8-hour window and fast for the other 16 hours of the day. Is there a difference as to when we do that? So they looked at people who were obese and putting them on diets. And then they looked at the end of the 6-month period for those that they then declared were metabolically, coming back to that word, metabolically unhealthy obese, and those that they then classified as metabolically healthy obese. Let's face it, obese isn't being healthy, but there is a difference between obesity. Some people can be really heavy, but they're able to run and they don't get a heart attack, and yet skinnier people will have a heart attack. Why is that happening? Because it's to do with these metabolic health markers. So at the end of this 6-month period, for all these obese individuals, they classified them. Were they metabolically unhealthy obese, or were they metabolically healthy obese? They looked at fasting blood glucose, they looked at their triglycerides, they looked at HDL cholesterol, they looked at their blood pressure, they looked at their waist circumference. And one of the important factors here when they're thinking about it from a metabolic health point of view, they were looking at women's waist measurement. I'll do this in inches because it makes more sense to me. 32 inches. Anything above that is considered metabolically unhealthy. And for men, anything over 36 inches is metabolically unhealthy. And they put those factors, they said they were metabolically unhealthy if they met 3 or more of those factors. And I won't go into the specific measurements, but I'm sure you're aware of the sort of measurements we'd be looking at when we're thinking about cholesterol and blood pressure. What they found is those that had the majority of their calorific intake, don't like to use the word calories, but you know, their greater intake of food in the first half of the day, rather than choosing to do their intake at the end of the day and fast at the start of the day. Those that consumed the greater part of their calories in the first half of the day were more metabolically healthy, and those that consumed their calorie intake more towards the second half of the day were more metabolically unhealthy, and they had higher adipose fat around their middles, had higher blood pressure. And so whilst I think it's worth bearing in mind, this isn't as I said, it's just one study, but what they found is that, you know, when we look at weight, it's not weight alone that we need to look at, we need to look at these metabolic markers. So whilst intermittent fasting can be very helpful in helping you lose weight, we also need to start to think about these metabolic health markers. And on just this one study, they said if you had more of your intake towards the first half of the day than eating really later in the day, and having most of your calorie intake or food intake later in the day, you were going to be healthier if it was in the first half of the day rather than later on. So that was the first study. Now the second study I've picked up on is to do with these things called ghrelin and leptin. I've spoken about ghrelin and leptin before. These are fairly new hormones that were discovered. They're produced in the gut and in the stomach, and they're to do with our telling the body if we're full or whether we're hungry. But there was a study that was done. I don't want to go into too much detail about these. They're a bit complicated, but it's basically to say that, you know, why is it that people can start to lose weight and they may not be able to maintain their weight? And it was to do with something called fasting ghrelin. I'll go into a bit more detail about the type of diets they had because this is the important bit. So fasting ghrelin, if you're able to produce more amounts of this fasting ghrelin, I'll tell you how to in a moment from this one study, then it enabled you to maintain your dietary restrictions, lose abdominal visceral fat, this belly fat and the visceral fat that's more internal around our organs, and improve insulin sensitivity. Going back to those metabolic health markers, improve insulin sensitivity. So this is the ability for the body to, the cells to recognize insulin and utilize that glucose in the bloodstream. That's a really, really important factor. With the body needs to be able to utilize insulin and take that glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells. So insulin sensitivity, or shall I say insulin resistance, is a predetermined marker for developing obesity. So how do we improve our fasting ghrelin levels, which in turn helps us to lose weight, improve insulin sensitivity markers, which is going to improve your metabolic health longer term and not just to do with weight? It was to do with polyphenols. It was to do with a polyphenol rich diet. So in terms of this study that was it was 300 participants. It's not huge. They were all abdominally obese. They were all aged over 30. It was done over 18 months, actually. It was quite a long study. But they split people into 3 areas. Was it just a typically fairly healthy diet? Were they following a Mediterranean diet? We know Mediterranean diets are really healthy, lots of fish, lots of vegetables in the diet. But the third category they put into a Mediterranean diet, but they also included people eating drinking 3 to 4 cups of green tea. And it was this green tea that had this bigger increase in this fasting ghrelin level, which improved all those other markers and the sustainability and ability to keep weight off longer term. It was a much bigger increase in improving his fasting glucose level with the group that had the green tea alongside having the Mediterranean diet. Now, what we know about green tea and what the study goes on to talk about is this polyphenols. Green tea is very rich in this plant compound, and there's lots of different types of them called polyphenols. So we can think about having a very plant-rich diet, and the Mediterranean diet is partly that. It's very much plant-based, as well as being lower in saturated fat, lots of fish, lots of olive oil. But it's not just about the green tea. It's saying polyphenols in general are probably a really important marker for helping the body to sustain weight loss, improve fasting ghrelin levels, improve insulin sensitivity, and help overall this ability to burn visceral fat in the body, which is part and parcel of this overall metabolic health. So where else do we find polyphenol-rich foods? We find it in those really dark berries, all our berries, whether it's blueberries and blackberries and raspberries and strawberries, pomegranates, walnuts, and lots of different types of nuts, walnuts in particular, seeds, particularly flaxseed, curcumin, which is found in turmeric, so using turmeric in the diet, and other spices like ginger is really, really important and helpful. Apples, olive oil and olives. So the berries, pomegranates, walnuts, apples, flax seeds, curcumin, olive oil and olives, polyphenols. Now I'll go one step further and say that what I do know about polyphenols, that we come back to polyphenols a lot when we think about our gut health and supporting the growth and nourishment of our beneficial bacteria. And I have spoken before in a talk about the links between gut and the gut bacteria and keeping it in balance and obesity, because there's been studies of that. So maybe there's a link there. I'm sure there is. If we have lots of polyphenol rich foods, we're supporting our gut bacteria, supporting our gut bacteria. That in turn is helping our metabolic health markers, which in turn is helping us to burn fat, improve our insulin sensitivity, keeping our blood sugar levels under control, helping our waist circumference, helping to keep weight off, and just helping all those other markers like blood pressure, fasting blood glucose, and all those other things that are really important longer term. I hope that's not been too technical for you. I hope that's made some sense. Please give a comment below if that's been of interest to you. So just bear in mind polyphenols and look up polyphenols and a polyphenol-rich diet and what foods are rich in polyphenols. It's not just eating those exclusively. I'm all about diversity and abundance, but again, it does keep coming back to, doesn't it, this plant food based diet. I'm not talking about vegan or vegetarian, it's being plant rich. We can all have a plant rich diet, but it doesn't need to be at the expense of not eating fish or meat. We can be plant rich, and that's the thing we need to think about going forward. But just have a little bit of a look at the information around polyphenols and why they are just more research that comes out about plant compounds and how they help our health in different ways. So I hope you found that's helpful. This will be uploaded into my YouTube channel. Do check out my YouTube channel if you haven't looked at it before. Do come over and subscribe so you'll then get notified when I put something new in there. I'm going to reclassify some of my talks in my YouTube channel, so it's easier to find all the ones to do with gut health, all the ones to do with nutrition in the news, and other categories. So that will be happening in the next few weeks, I hope. But I hope you can join me next week for a particular topic, which I haven't decided on just yet. Always, if you've got a topic that will be of interest to you that I haven't yet spoken about, please do let me know in the comments. I hope you can join me next week, and thank you for watching tonight or watching on catch up, and I'll see you next week. Have a lovely week, everybody. Bye.